I've been in the Bitcoin space now for about 10 years, building things, writing things. I wrote for Zero Hedge, I wrote for Bitcoin Magazine for a long time. And about 3 years ago, I wrote a piece for Bitcoin Magazine called The Three Generations Theory. And in there, I made the case that Bitcoin is not just like some blockchain technology, and projecting technological adoption curves into Bitcoin just misses the entire point altogether. Bitcoin is something so much bigger, something more fundamental, and the concept of hyper-Bitcoinization, the idea that Bitcoin is going to take over the world, is going to take a lot longer than what most people imagine in their minds today, which is both good and bad, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So the reason that Bitcoin is going to take, or hyper-Bitcoinization going to take a long time, is that Bitcoin is not just a technology, it is a techno-socioeconomic phenomenon. And what that means is, that's a fancy way of saying, it's not a product, it's not a social network, it's not a stock, it's not a security, it's not an iPhone. Bitcoin is a paradigm shift of the most fundamental building block in human civilization, and that is money. Money underlies everything. It underlies the very fabric of human society. And in fact, there can be no civilization without a means of storing, measuring, and exchanging some form of value through some form of objective medium, right? And that is what Bitcoin represents. So therefore, by reinventing money, which is effectively what Bitcoin is, it impacts every level of society. And that's a big deal. And it's a process that's not going to happen in years. It's a process that is going to take decades and even generations to occur, which is why the theory is the three generations theory. So some of you have probably seen this chart. It's by a friend of mine called Murad Mahmudov, and he put it together after he and I were working on some essays a number of years ago, and I drew this thing called the Bitcoin Evolutionary Pyramid. And he then produced this chart, which is fantastic, and in my opinion, still today represents one of the best evolutionary charts of Bitcoin's progression. And you'll notice that he didn't put a time on the x-axis, which was very smart, because there's a classic saying, you can predict what but not when, or when but not what, but you can never do both. And I'm actually going to try and do both in this talk. I'm going to try and lay out exactly how long this process of hyper-Bitcoinization is going to take, and what will happen along the way in terms of businesses, industries, and opportunities. So, according to this theory, this magical theory, we will reach mass adoption sometime in 2070, so about 60 years after Bitcoin's inception. That means today we're only 16 years in, which, believe it or not, means that we're at the very bottom of the S-curve. Things haven't even begun to get crazy yet. The three generations theory is, of course, about these three phases of evolution. And I'm going to go through them in detail in this talk, but just as a quick overview. Generation 1 is the speculative era, or what I like to call the infection stage. In this era, Bitcoin slowly infects key mines, key infrastructure, and it acts a bit like a virus, because it's something that is foreign and something that is minor, right? It is different to what exists today. As it comes into contact with other hosts, like all good ideas, it begins to spread. And we've seen that with Bitcoin. From its modest beginnings, we've seen it grow exponentially. 15 years ago, 10,000 Bitcoin bought you a pizza. Today, you've got countries, BlackRock, you've got these conferences going on. It's changed. Generation 2, infrastructure stage, or what I call the symbiosis, if we're using the viral analogy. Kids who were born in 2009 and who have never known a world without Bitcoin, they're going to come of age by 2030. They will be taking their first steps into entrepreneurship, and in the same way as kids today, they use the tools around them to build stuff, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to embed global, instant, secure financial capabilities into every sort of product and service they build, in the same way as we do with the internet today. Then generation 3 is the inversion stage. So by 2050, the children of our children will have come of age. And they'll be so far removed from the first generation of the speculative era, and so much of the infrastructure will have occurred by then, that they're just going to do entirely new things with it. They're the ones who would take Bitcoin the last mile to quote-unquote mass adoption. and they will transform it into the global monetary standard and embed it into everything beyond just money, into energy, into transportation, into governance, into all of it. And by this stage, society will have fundamentally transformed. Now, unfortunately, most of us here are probably going to be dead by then. We likely will not see it. There's this great saying, which is, our generation has bestowed upon us both the gift of being the founding fathers of a new world and the curse of enduring the collapse for this privilege. I always try to explain to people that Bitcoin is not really for us. Bitcoin is for our children and our children's children. And I do believe this deeply. I hope to be alive for the third generation because I want to see how all of this evolves. But like the builders of the cathedrals and the great nations we live in today, we may not live to see the end of our project, but we get to be the ones who plant the seed that will shape what the future generations will do with the world. So, since this process is so long, the practical side of me wants to know, what the hell do we do now? How do we capitalize on this process? And what are the next big opportunities, and how can we, you, all of us here, position ourselves to capitalize on those? So, to do that, let's jump into each of the generations one by one. So, generation one, as I said, the speculative era or the infection stage. This generation was born with 1 foot in the old world and 1 foot in the new world. And we can't, like, we are all here generation one Bitcoiners, and we can't help but compare the new world, Bitcoin, with the old world, the fiat world. Much like how the older generations still compare gold to fiat money. And this applies to all of us because Bitcoin is so young. Bitcoin's only 15 years old or 16 years old. So as a result, any one of us who has the capital or the skills today to do anything with Bitcoin is fundamentally someone who had 1 foot in the old and 1 foot in the new. So if you think about like this generational conceptual relationship to Bitcoin, it's one of comparison. And if you understand that, then what kind of businesses, industries, and ideas might come from this sort of generational wide psychological viewpoint? Well, let's think about it. How to acquire, how to dispose of, how to exchange it, how to store it, how to produce it, and how to get as much as possible. So in other words, miners, wallets, exchanges being the big one, and now in the late stage of this initial cycle, of this initial era, is the strategy plays or the treasury plays, trying to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. And the interesting thing about this era is it's not only the most financialized one, but it's the one where Bitcoin enters as a new idea, which is where the viral analogy comes in, right? Good ideas are like viruses, and they spread and they infect not just the one branch. So Bitcoin infected the financial system, but it also infected literature, it infected philosophy, it infected entertainment, government, energy, and it's really starting to spread in this first stage, which is hence why I call it the infection stage. And this accelerates until we reach the next stage of evolution, which is the infrastructure stage, or the viral analogy is symbiosis, right? So the virus becomes part of the system. So in this era, it will be shaped by two profiles who each have their own conceptual, psychological relationship to Bitcoin. First, you'll have the entrepreneurs in their 30s, 40s, 50s, those who were around during generation one. And they've thus integrated into their worldview and to their toolkits, right? So they have the capital, they have the experience, and they understand Bitcoin, so they use it. The second is the younger generations, the up-and-coming leaders who, they were born in 2009, 2010. They will come of age. They'll be 20 years old by 2030. And for them, like, they won't know a world without it. They'll look at Bitcoin as a tool, very similar to how we today look at JavaScript or the internet or language models, right? It's native to us. It'll be native to them. And this era of comparison will slowly lose its influence and fade away. And the way Bitcoin is perceived will fundamentally change. It will be appreciated for the problems that it solves and for the capacity of the tool that it is. And anyone at that stage who's ignoring Bitcoin or deriding it is just going to be left behind, right? They will not have access to an ever-increasingly global market that is on 24/7. And that's why I call it the Symbiosis era. The virus will have gone beyond the point of infection, and it is now a part of the system. You will find Bitcoin in everything, everywhere. No longer for, this is really important, no longer for purely ideological or speculative reasons, but because it is a better tool to embed into your product stack. So kind of similar to how today the internet is embedded in everything, right? And we're talking here now 40 years later, and funny enough, we are 40 years into the internet revolution as well. Generation 3, the mass adoption stage. So this is the final evolutionary era. To continue the viral analogy, this is where the symbiote finally becomes the system. This is the inversion, where the entire system is reconstituted and the old is replaced with the new. And with Bitcoin having become a global utility like the internet by this stage, we're going to see the rise of totally new businesses, industries, concepts, and all the sorts of things that we can barely imagine today. And it reminds me of this meme, right? Like, I don't know if you remember, but the internet was originally all on copper lines, right? The internet ran on top of the telephone system. But now fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, phones and all of the communications runs on top of the internet. So you had this inversion of the system. And the same thing is going to happen with Bitcoin. It's going to unlock entirely new markets, entirely new ideas. But it's going to take time to get there. Trouble is, obviously, we may not be alive for this. So the question now is for us, what can we do? What is actionable for the people sitting in this room? Because Generation 3 is too far away. Well, in my opinion, we need to start thinking about what are the industries or what are the products and services that are going to be reinvented that we can build Bitcoin into. So a quick case study here is this concept of what I call the experience economy. As things move, we're going to see some industries die, some be born, some transform. The experience economy, in my opinion, is one of these new phenomenons emerging where people, like, not only do we have this whiplash from COVID where everyone was locked in their houses and all this sort of stuff, people want to get together again, but also the internet is changing. It's full of online slop, everything is content, everything is media, everything is ads. People want to catch up in person again. So you're seeing this rising sort of movement towards people doing things and stuff. And this is a trend that's not going to stop. This is a concept that will continue to evolve as the internet gets drowned out by AI. So if you combine these things, this is an example of what we're building. We're trying to capitalize on this concept by building a product that takes Bitcoin and embeds it into the native functionality of the product. So if anyone here is familiar with products like Luma or Eventbrite or things like that, we're building an events app that is Bitcoin native, that you can spin up an event, and you can do ticketing, you can do community, you can do all of that sort of stuff, and you can do it natively from anywhere in the world and not be bound by fiat rails or KYC or any of that sort of stuff. You spin up an event, you get paid, you run an event, and you can build a community or a creator or an event instantly. I don't have time to give like the whole pitch. I could go on and on, so I'm going to just jump straight to the end. And if anyone wants to talk to me about the product and everything, we can discuss that later. But basically, the point is this. Bitcoin's going to take another 40 to 50 years to fully mature. For the last 15 years, all the fortune has been made already with exchanges, wallets, miners, and more recently, treasury strategies. And I would say there's probably another couple of years for that stuff to happen. What I'm interested in, what I suggest you all get interested in, is what is next? What comes after this era? And for me, that answer lies in what are the industries that are going to be transformed or created in this next era, in and around Bitcoin, that Bitcoin will become a part of. So I showed you the experience economy as one example. There's going to be many other examples. In my opinion, all sorts of industries, products, and services are going to get reinvented. So the question for you, and I'll leave you here, is what are you building? What are you buying? What are you investing in? Where will you find the next Coinbase, the next Binance, the next Ledger, the next Bitmain, or the next MicroStrategy? Thank you for your time.